All right, let's see what happens. Let's do what we do best. Let's roll it. Do I need a little background thing here? No, I guess I don't.
Oh, you're good.
All right, we're rolling, baby. Here we go. Dana Slinky Podcast, episode 29. We got new timers. We got new timers, Will.
Big time. We're big time.
We're getting big time. Here we go. All right, so you got to hum this one. This is a big one. Where am I wrong? A lot of us struggle with woulda, coulda, shoulda type thinking. I should have taken a job opportunity. I should have, tried to go with that gal back in the day. Try to make it work with that relationship. And we can beat ourselves up over it, And there's this idea that if we rewound the video of our life, that we could do differently in that moment. But there's no evidence for that. We can't be mad at ourselves for thoughts that we didn't have or decisions we didn't make in that given moment. So where am I wrong on determinism?
Right. So this is a tricky one, Dan. So I'm gonna try my best. So here's where you're wrong. So
yeah.
People don't they're not reliving that. I don't think people have like an honest. They're not being fully transparent with what they mean. They might not even be aware of what they mean when they say that. So it's like, oh man, I wish I could have done that. Like I feel like what they actually mean by that is I've learned a lot from that mistake. I think that's what they're actually saying. They're not like just living in the past with it. I don't know. What do you think?
I think there's a lot of if only statements and a lot of like there definitely is an idea that you can repeat the past, or you could have done differently in that moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of the keys to forgiveness is realizing that there really isn't. Again, you can't really forget. You can't be mad at yourself for not having a thought at that time that you just didn't have, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair argument. I think and the self-kindness piece is really important because I think it's definitely easy to get stuck in the world of, oh well, I had to pause and think about this and chose this, and it's like, well, right. Why did you choose that? You can't choose to choose it. So.
Yeah, that's the thing too. Is if you think that some folks are more rational when it comes to taking time to make a decision. Some are just more in the moment. But either way, even if you do take 5 weeks to choose job A or job B, there's no reason you could have done otherwise.
It's still a formula for choosing, right? It's still these are the inputs, these are the outputs, kind of.
Right. So you can still do a scientific kind of analysis of it, but we got to forgive ourselves, folks. So determinism.
Definitely. All right, so let's go fallacy. A couple examples here. Pay close attention to the language in them. Okay, the first one's kind of simple. It's all dogs hate some cats, and the elaborate example is all financial experts recommend people invest in technology stocks. So those are your two statements. What's the logical fallacy there?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the congruency between the two because it doesn't seem to be a ton. All dogs hate some cats. If you said all investors, all financiers,
all financial experts recommend this. So where's the fallacy there?
I guess my brain is focused on the connection between those two examples, but it has something to do with perspective, right? Just because someone's or preconceived bias that one might have, just because I'm an investor by trade, I don't have the perspective of someone else who might not have the means or might not have the knowledge or know how to be investing in technology stocks. Same thing with a dog.
Yeah, get closer. So what I want to focus on was the words all and some.
Yeah.
So those are called quantifiers, and so this is a quantification fallacy. So when you make statements and you're like, oh, all financial experts recommend, it's like, well, there's really no way to accurately verify that. You can't you're not gonna be able to talk to every financial expert to get, and even if you did, they probably wouldn't all say this. So, and same thing with all dogs hate some cats. It's you can never, if you're making a universal quantifier, all X, that's usually a huge red flag for a logical fallacy coming right at your face.
I'm about to hit you with one. Yeah, I got a little thrown off with the sum because you did two quantifiers in the first example, and I was trying to see why you didn't do that in the second one, but I guess that's me just getting a little bogged down. But hey, some dogs like cats. I imagine we haven't surveyed all the dogs in the world. There's a lot of them. So until we do that, then we won't really know what the consensus is on cats.
And it comes back to a lot of language is very black and white when actually there's probably more of these bell curves of truth. So all right, tip of the day, Dan.
I think we'll cut out. Oh my goodness. Okay. Anyway, the time's going, so I'm just going to go. Tip of the day, it's the real self-love episode, the real self-love focus for all you folks at home that are watching. A lot of us struggle with impostor syndrome, whether it is having some success in a relationship or career. It could even be athletically if you're of that age. If you are struggling with it, tell everyone around you that you feel like an imposter, that you are in fact an imposter. It'll go away immediately. That's the best way to deal with it.
I love this one, and I think it's something that I think will take people by surprise. But it's kind of like the kind of kill them with kindness thing. It's or self-deprecation, kind of like the self-deprecating sense of humor, makes people like you more, kind of thing. Where it's like, oh, if I'm being hard on myself and being vulnerable, then that opens myself up to actually more strength. I think if you've seen Brene Brown talk about that, she's a huge fan of the just using vulnerability as actually a sneaky strength. So
yeah, I can read that more. I still need to read her book.
I just watched her TED Talk. Books are a racket, Dan.
Books are a racket. That's another interesting distinction between the bullet points of books. If you I'm very against the Blinkist thing. Have you seen that? What's up? We got to be supporting books, but books should be shorter anyway. When it comes to imposter syndrome, I think it's just more being proactive and putting stuff out there as opposed to letting it sit and linger and eat away from you from the inside. Because imposter syndrome is definitely a weird thing, and even folks that are really well. You say an example, I can't remember the guy's name off the top of my head, but a lot of folks do struggle with it, especially once they have some success. It's why am I having this success? Why is this me of all the people? And then it can lead to some negative self-talk. So it's interesting. I think getting out in the open is positive.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because just with that tip, by sharing, just being honest about hey, I feel like I'm an imposter. I am an imposter. That's going to change. That's going to change the story you tell yourself about who you are, right? By leveling the playing field of I am an imposter, then you can kind of build it from there. And so, I don't know. It's kind of like undersell expectations, over deliver kind of.
Yeah, that's kind of theme of some of my tips as far as just being proactive with stuff. Whether you're dealing with relationships or professional life.
Definitely. Okay, magic wand. So this is you get to reconfigure the social functioning of our brain. So when we see a friend or see an acquaintance, coworker, even just texting a friend, it's those first interactions are always so just hey, how's it going? What's up?
Yeah.
How's the family, Dan? So you get to change.
That's my favorite line.
So you get to change what people do when they first interact, and it doesn't have to be language based. It could be maybe there's a shared activity. Get creative with it. That's your magic wand.
Yeah, I didn't have one that completely popped in my brain when you first said this before the show, but the one that I just came up with, I guess maybe it's a theme of the episode. But hey, Will, what are you struggling with right now? That would be kind of interesting.
Deep end.
Just get right in
I like
there,
it.
like instead of, hey, how's it going, man? Oh, I'm doing great. And all this, it's like, hey, what are you struggling with, man? Like, I think that could be an interesting way, especially, you know, when reconnecting with folks or just doing your best to stay in touch with a good family member, good friend. Like, I'll ask it to, or I think just even volunteer. Like, hey, I'm doing well, but struggling with X, Y, Z. Like, I think it's a good way to.
Yeah, I think maybe offering that first from your perspective, not just like.
Yeah, so just putting them on their heels immediately. Not good sales tactics, folks. Not good sales tactics. I know that I advocate for sales. But something like that. Yes, maybe improve social norm around that.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I was trying to think of like a like an actual activity, like some sort of fruitful activity that people do, like right when if they see each other, where it's just like, hey, hey, how's it going? And just like immediately show them like a picture that summarizes your past week, like just like a photo from your phone or something, like not one that's on social media, it's just like some other random photo. I don't know, something like that, where it's like some sort of sharing and genuine connection, as opposed to, you know, this kind of like back in, you know, just like I don't even know what to call that. I guess just shallow conversation.
Kind of glib. I think glib's a good word. That's what that means, right?
I'll have to break out my Merriam-Webster's dictionary for that.
Glib is like if I was like, hey, like, well, we should hang out sometime, and I just don't mean it at all. Like, that's a glib statement. Yeah, I think that any way that you can get folks to open up and be their true selves, whatever you can do.
I don't think everyone's prepared for it. Maybe we have to change like what our threshold is for those sorts of conversations.
That's a good point too.
I'm not sure we have.
Do we have the emotional stamina for that? Because I mean, that's definitely a thing. Like maybe we're just like, okay, I can only handle so many deep conversations.
Well, the thing is, like, our brains aren't designed for like that many, you know, intimate relationships, be that with, you know, romantically
exactly
or otherwise. So it's like if you're just, you know, going into you know. So I guess it depends on what you're talking about when you mean like small talk or like seeing an old friend. Or when I think of seeing an old friend, I think opening up is a key way to like having a productive discussion. Because if you try to do like the, oh, how are you? Like, what are you up to these days? Then you get into like the, oh, I'm doing this. And then it's a very like, in sales, we call that a parent-to-parent conversation. That's like, oh, my little Johnny's doing this. Oh, my little Susie's doing this. Like, it's just very unproductive. But if you can get that down a level, and then you can get to like adult to adult, if you can be like, hey man, like I'm doing this. Like, oh, word, like that's cool. And then the lowest level is child, and then you can have like different variations at any given point.
Well, what's a child conversation there?
Child is like it usually goes from like top down, from like parent down to, I'm trying to think of a good example, but maybe reaction based on emotions over like you know, where you're really at in any given circumstance.
interesting.
Instead of like
that's a cool way to. I think we're definitely lacking. This is a really interesting idea, because I think we don't really have a framework to, you know, process the different types of conversations we have, right? Like, we don't really have like, okay, what's the, you know, X and Y axes of different types of conversations throughout the day? Is it like depth, emotional depth? Is it like, I don't know. I feel like, or the length of it, I don't know. I feel like we don't really have a good way to understand when we're in those conversations, and we don't have a good way to prioritize creating environments for those conversations either.
Right.
You know?